Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you may be. You're listening to the soothing sounds of the waiting room for our fairing dash slash this thing with Brandon Amoroso of Electriq. We're going to give it another maybe 2 minutes or so for the stragglers. All right, Brandon, how do you feel? You want to get this thing moving?
Yeah, that works for me.
As usual, people late to the game will just have to miss out. That's all right, though.
We can always share the recording.
Yes, we will be sharing the recording. The great cheat code of webinar attendance. But I should say, as a bit of housekeeping, if you are part of the fairing community, then you already had a chance to log some of your questions for Brandon. So I've got a handful of those here. If you're not a fairing brand, then all is not lost. You can use this lovely little chat on the right-hand side and ask your questions live, which is something that people viewing the recording cannot do. So kudos to you for showing up, folks, especially in this mid-December. Well, it's not a lull, is it? I don't know. It's a grind, I guess. Pre-holiday grind, holiday grind. At any rate,
definitely feels like a grind going into the holidays.
Yeah. Well, hopefully everyone's cozied up with some tea and ready to hear Brandon spill the tea on how he makes this work so well. So if you are on this webinar, then you probably don't need much introduction to fairing, and I would not want to step on Brandon's opportunity to show you all the great things about fairing anyway. So I will not give you too much of an intro other than to say, if you are not aware of who we are, then you most likely have at least used our product via a post-purchase survey. Chances are, if you've bought anything off a D2C brand and got a post-purchase survey, there are pretty good odds that it was from fairing. So I will only say that, and I will just add one thing, which is that everything you see today presented by Brandon is available in every fairing plan. So there's no fancy elite status you have to earn or crazy amount you have to pay to get certain features. Everything you see here can be applied, most of it within minutes of signing off this webinar and signing up. So go give that a try. I will spend more time introducing Brandon. Brandon obviously is, for many of you probably know, Brandon is quite the powerhouse, both as a personal brand and as the founder and president of Electriq. And actually, you have so many trophies that I think actually, instead of just riffing off what I know of you, I'm just going to read your thing because I'm going to forget. otherwise. I'll start from the top, actually. So Brandon is the founder and president of leading e-commerce agency Electriq, as I already said. He built the business to oversee more than 55 brands and 45 team members in just 3 years before drinks.com acquired it this April. Congratulations, Brandon. Under Brandon's leadership, Electriq has achieved the highest certifications available for the DTC industry. This is the part I always forget because there's so many. Shopify Plus, Klaviyo Elite, Attentive Pioneer, Okendo Platinum, Recharge Innovation Partner of the Year. Also, I think I just saw, this is how many awards he gets. I just saw that you've earned some kind of a thing with Malomo as well. In the time between you making this slide and, and starting this webinar, you've gotten another certification. So that's awesome. And I'll actually let you. Why don't you go ahead and speak to the brands that you've worked with? But they are myriad and many. So I'll just, in fact, I'll just basically officially kick it off to you right here, Brandon. If you want to just get
Awesome.
grooving and show people what's up. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for everybody who's interested in checking out how Electriq leverages fairing in sort of a unique way that's a little bit beyond just attribution. I think I just want to make one comment on what you said about the plans being the same across the board. That's like so important, I find, for any software that we work with, because I can't tell you how inhibiting it is if, because of budget restrictions we have with a certain client or not, we're not able to leverage the solution in the same way we would for a $100 million brand versus a $5 million brand.
Love it.
So I think that's a really important thing to note about one of the differentiators for fairing and why we're such a big supporter of it. So with all that being said, I already got a quick little intro here, but I think the important thing to note about Electriq and sort of how we try and differentiate ourselves is being entirely customer experience and retention marketing focused. So we don't do anything that involves acquisition, and we only touch Shopify and Shopify Plus brands. So industries we typically are looking at like CPG, retail, some celebrity brands, but really the industry doesn't matter so much as Shopify or Shopify Plus, because as we've invested so deeply in our tech partner relationships, where the magic truly happens working with Electriq is when we're in your Klaviyo account and we're helping architect these customer journeys, leveraging solutions that plug into Klaviyo, like a fairing, but then also taking into account data that could be coming in from like a rebuy or from a Gorgeous to build out these really sophisticated customer retention experiences. So that's sort of the way that I'm going to be approaching this webinar talk, whatever we're calling it here, and why I think we leverage the solution in a little bit different way than maybe most brands would. And feel free to drop any questions in the chat as we go through this. I can't see the chat, but I'm sure we'll do Q&A at the end or stop in the middle at any time. But for those of you that are on the webinar that don't have an understanding of what fairing is, I'm just going to give this quick, brief overview before we dive into some more specifics. But sort of the long and the short of it is post-purchase survey platform. Standard has been on Shopify and Shopify Plus. There's been a lot of work done with API development and allowing integration with any platform, which is super exciting as well. But as you get the zero-party data, you're able to pass that information through to other apps. So the biggest use case I'm going to touch on here is getting into Klaviyo, because a lot of you are familiar with fairing from an attribution standpoint, like, hey, where did you hear about us? And then being able to pass that data into Google Analytics to create like customer segments to do analysis with. But for me, the biggest differentiator and the reason why we use fairing with all of our clients is the email and SMS personalization standpoint. And the way that we approach what questions we want to ask a customer is to think about what we'd want to know about them in order to provide helpful like personalization. So you think of yourself as a customer of your own brand, like what would be a relevant piece of information needed in order to create an experience that's going to be differentiated. And the most obvious example I like to use here is like skincare type for a skincare brand. If you know skincare type, you can dramatically change the way that you communicate to a customer, not only in the automated flows that they're receiving via email and text, but also in your one-time campaign strategy. Even simple things like Black Friday, Cyber Monday, as opposed to sending out a hero image with a product that is for oily skin, you would be sending out an image of a hero product of dry skin to your segment in Klaviyo that has answered that they have dry skin as a response to one of the fairing survey questions. So that's really how we figure out the questions that need to be asked in order to get the required data. I've seen time and time again questions asked without any sort of idea or thought behind how they're actually going to be implemented. And then as a customer, you're not really sure why you're giving away this data when it's not being leveraged. And so being transparent has been very, very helpful for us as we build out these programs with our brands. And then the other thing is you're going to have drop off at every point in your question stream. So from question 1 to question 2, question 2 to question 3, and so on. So you want to make sure that you're asking questions that are going to be able to drive incremental business results for you. And I'll touch on the specific 4 use cases that we typically use fairing for in the next slide here. So baseline is attribution, letting your customers tell you how they found you. An example of this would be, obviously, how did you first hear about us? TikTok, Instagram, podcasts, from a friend, was it Facebook, whatever it may be. So that's core use case number 1. And that is where a lot of brands stop. But the second use case is getting data that's going to allow you to create new segments in Klaviyo. And then from there, you can do personalization. So to touch on the example again, it would be, what type of skin do you have as one use case. The third is CRO. So just getting feedback from your customers on how to optimize the site experience from the PDP page all the way through the checkout flow. Example question of this would be, was there anything about your site visit today that you didn't like? And then fourth is research. So you can really turn your customers into your biggest source of info. And it doesn't have to be like hard data pick lists to choose from. You can just source open feedback here. And one example of this would be like, what would you Google to find a brand like ours, which could maybe inform your SEO strategy. Another one could be target all returning customers with the question, what's your favorite aspect of insert brand name here? And then you can start to dig into some of these responses more. And one of the most interesting things I've seen, a couple brands that we work with, is they take the responses from those research style questions, they map it into a Klaviyo segment, pull out all the people who have spent like $1,000 or more with the brand or have 10 orders or more, and then they actually reach out to them to host like discovery questionnaires, 15 or 30-minute phone calls with the customers. Not only does it get them more engaged, but you get so much valuable feedback from a consumer when you're able to connect with them in that way. So all this is based off of the question stream. And don't just start and end with one question. One of the things that we focus on is how do we start digging into our customer needs and wants more with follow-up questions. So there's certain use cases where, depending on how somebody responds to something, we might prompt them with something else. But at the very least, you need to have subsequent questions, because I can't remember the exact number, but once you have a customer answer that first question, the percentage that answer the rest is actually very, very high. It's more so that first question, which is the barrier. Once they're in that sort of sharing mood, that's your opportunity to ask those follow-up questions right away. And so it's really important to have this set up in place. One of the easiest things that we do when onboarding a brand to fairing is leveraging the targeting of all versus new versus returning customers. And the reason why we do this is because for new customers, that percentage that are coming back from order number 1 to order number 2 is probably one of the most important, if not the most important metric for a brand to hone in on. Every order from order number 2 to order number 3, order number 3 to order number 4, there's going to be drop off, but the biggest drop off is always order number 1 to order number 2, and then it trickles down throughout the rest. So if you can minimize the order number 1 to order number 2 drop off, it's going to make the entire rest of that trickle look better and be able to improve significantly the LTV that you're getting out of your customers on average. So we're asking very specific questions to those new customers that directly feeds data into our post-purchase flows to get them to come back for that second order. Now, on the returning customer front, that's where we can really start to dig into what are the aspects of this experience that made them come back? What are the pain points that our product is addressing? Is there a way that we can engage with these customers on a more one-to-one level? And so that's how we like to use the new versus returning. Third is frequency. So depending on the questions, you may want to have it be until answered or always. But one example would be, how did you hear about us? That would be something that you ask until it gets answered. But how was your website experience today? That's something that could always be asked. And so it's important to just denote those two. And then my favorite thing out of all of the questions here is the other response, because this is a great way to see what other responses you should be adding for customers to choose from. Because while the other responses and like the long form text response from your customers is great, that doesn't make it as easily used and leveraged in Klaviyo for segmentation and personalization. So let's say you didn't have, just use a really easy example. Let's say you didn't have TikTok in your how did you hear about us question, but then you saw of the other responses, almost 20% of them were saying they found you on TikTok. You'd want to create that as a option from the actual response list. So that way it's getting fed into Klaviyo as a data point and also Google Analytics. So you can start to dig into your customer segments and also all the analytics that Fairing is providing you for that question. So that is really the biggest use case I see for why you allow people to have those other responses. Now comes in analytics. And I believe you just recently released this extrapolation to 100%, but at a high level, you can see what percentage of customers answered the question a certain way. And so this can help inform so many aspects of your business. But the way we like to leverage it is making business decisions around like new product development, making business decisions around channel spend. So if you're seeing a ton of traffic coming through podcasts with a high AOV, then maybe that's an area that you want to invest more in versus Facebook, where you're seeing a lower AOV and a lower total volume across the board. Next is total value. So just what's the total revenue amount from customers who answered the question this way? And then also what's the AOV? So just because a high percentage are coming from a certain channel, if the AOV is low, maybe you don't want to invest more into that channel. Maybe you want to invest into one of your higher AOV producing channels. And that's something that you can pull out of this. And then the last part is the extrapolation to 100%. So if you extrapolated those responses to be for 100% of your orders, then this is what the total revenue amount would look like. And there is some issues with non-response bias. So work to get your question completion rate above 50%. Typically, we see out of the box fans hovering around 60 to 65. So you don't have to get creative here. But if you are below 50%, you can start to think about how do you incentivize it more. And then one of the things I'll show in an upcoming slide here is embedding the post-purchase survey into your Klaviyo post-purchase flow for those who did not answer at checkout. And so that allows you to get that percentage up a little bit higher too. So there's three main integrations I want to highlight here. There's a couple of others like Audacity, for example, that aren't applicable to everyone. But here, I think Google Analytics, Klaviyo, and Shopify Flow are applicable across the board for any brand that is using Fairing. So with Google Analytics, you're actually sending events to Google Analytics, both question asked and the question response. So that allows you to then create custom segments in Google Analytics of the users of sessions who fit like a specific criteria. So let's say you want to analyze all customers who found you on TikTok. You can do that and pull any GA data that you'd be able to pull, more generally speaking, on that specific cohort. So you can really start to do some in-depth cohort analyses based off of the data that Fairing is passing into GA. And this helps a lot, especially given all the iOS 14 changes with attribution, because your customer is the number one source of truth. And just because a pixel fired or didn't fire doesn't mean if they're telling you specifically, I saw you on a TikTok ad, that you should not take that at face value. Second, and where Electriq spends the bulk of its time, is on the Klaviyo integration. So one click, all your question responses flow into the Klaviyo profile activity feed and the custom property sections. And then from there, there's two ways that we leverage it for the most part. One is creating custom flows. So based off of those question stream responses that we covered earlier, you can create a segment of varying responders that you want to target, and then have that trigger emails and texts that go out to the customer. And then the other part is sending emails and texts to users who haven't completed a survey. And that's sort of the missing link I see a lot of times. A brand will get set up with fairing, they'll have it in their checkout flow, but then it's not a part of their transactional post-purchase experience or of the post-purchase, like come back and purchase from us replenishment flow. And so that's one area that I see a lot of opportunity for brands to take more advantage of. And then the last is Shopify Flow, because within Shopify Flow, you're able to sort of append tags to customers. And so one of the things we like to do is bucket people into Shopify tagged cohorts based off of the responses that they give to the fairing surveys. So the four main use cases: attribution, as mentioned, analyze what traffic sources are driving the most customers to your store, how valuable they are, what's the AOV. This allows you to get smarter with where you're spending your ad dollars. Second second use case that we leveraged at Electriq recently is over the Black Friday, Cyber Monday holiday, changing a lot of our customers' survey questions to ask everybody right after checkout, was this order a gift? Because this set off two things. For one, we want to understand if the person purchasing is the actual end consumer, obviously, or if they're a gift recipient, or if they're a gift giver, because from there, we're going to trigger a flow specifically for gift purchasers. Like, hey, you bought this for X, Y, and Z. Why don't you come back and treat yourself? Here's like an additional something for sharing our brand. And now moving forward, we also know that they're a gift purchaser of this brand. And so maybe we actually only reach out to them around this gifting time period moving forward. And then the second aspect is for the individual purchasers, we know that we can bucket them into our more traditional post-purchase flows, but we want to communicate with these two cohorts differently. And the best use case here is actually one of our previous clients, Florence by Mills. They have a consumer base that is around, I'd say, 6 to 15-year-old girls is really the demographic, but they're not the ones who are actually purchasing the product. They're the end user. They're not the ones with the credit cards, though, and they're not the ones who really need to receive some of our emails and texts about sales. And so we actually have this question running year-round for them, because we have a group in Klaviyo of all the parents and grandparents, and then we have a group of all of the like end customers. But tying those two together is very, very challenging. And fairing is a really great solution and tool for us to be able to communicate with those two audiences differently. Because if I'm a parent, I don't want 7 emails a week about Millie Bobby Brown and her new hair care routine. But if I'm the end consumer, I do. And so it's very important that we communicate with the two differently. Third use case that we recently leveraged is a question for Soylent. So very simply, would you like to be a part of Soylent's Innovation Lab? This was asked to all returning customers, and the Innovation Lab is essentially like their exclusive consumer research group. And so it was only asked to returning customers, and then this would trigger a flow in Klaviyo to add them to a segment of all like high value customers who indicated that yes, they would like to be a part of this. And so from there, then you would conduct the reach out, you would go through the process of what that looks like for them. But this was a great way to source net new participants for that. And then the last one, I'll leverage the skincare brand example again. But what are you trying to improve most about your skin? And if you're a consumable company, like maybe a drink company or supplements, you could ask something along the lines of like, what are you trying to improve most about your health? Sort of the questions go on and on here. This is one where you'll definitely want to include the other response, because the other response will help you sort of flesh out the pick list of options you're going to want to show your customers. And then as soon as this is answered, all, for example, dry skin responders now get personalized flow in campaign content. So as mentioned before, that first to second order is super important. So how do we tailor the transactional experience all around like dry skin for those customers? And then for campaign content moving forward, it's very low hanging fruit to as opposed to saying Black Friday, Cyber Monday, here's 40% off. You can say Black Friday, Cyber Monday, here's 40% off your like dry skin, I don't know, bundle or something along those lines. Just making reference to the fact that it is more personalized for them. So you might be thinking about how do you actually get started with extending beyond just the original and sort of core use case of fairing being attribution. And one of the things that we like to leverage is the question bank. So this provides you with a massive library. I believe there's over 100 now, and they're all tagged based off of the 4 use cases of fairing around questions for you to start thinking about how you could potentially leverage in your customer journey. So this is a great place to start. It's now baked right within the app. And so take a look around here. They're all very easily editable, like to your preferences, because obviously your brand's going to use like different language or different terminology. This is a great place to get started for those who are starting to think about how they could aggregate a little bit more zero-party data, what they want to do from a retention standpoint in their email and SMS flows. So I would highly recommend that you take a look at this and start to dig in here. So that was sort of the fast and furious how we leverage fairing at Electriq. I think the most important thing to note is take the platform beyond its core use case of attribution. You're selling yourself and minimizing the ROI that you're going to get from the solution if you just use it for attribution. That is very powerful as a mechanism to improve retention via those email and SMS flows in Klaviyo. And they don't even have to be limited to a marketing perspective. I mean, we leverage fairing and Malomo like together to indicate what sort of transactional journey they should go down, not only from an email and text standpoint, but also what order tracking page are we sending them to? What's the content that we want to show this customer based off of the responses that they gave to us in their fairing post-purchase survey? So don't limit yourself to just the attribution. Really think about how you can extend fairing into your email and SMS flows to help improve retention. And then don't underestimate the power of connecting with customers one-on-one, having maybe 3 to 5 like discovery calls a week, and leveraging fairing to be able to pull out that information on who would be the most sort of poignant person to talk to. But with that, thanks everybody for listening, and excited to jump into some Q&A here.
Yeah, awesome. And thank you, Brandon. That was that's an awesome use case that we selfishly really love at fairing, is the whole buyer versus user problem, and finding out who your purchase is for. I think that's probably one of the things we find most that people learn is, as you've probably seen and you were kind of alluding to, is there's that initial challenge of thinking like, well, I probably only have, a few core segments of my customer base, right? And anything else is maybe getting a little bit too nitpicky and too specific, although Klaviyo would argue you shouldn't have a list segment more than 5% of your base, which is an interesting stat for sure. But I think who's the person who actually swiped the card and who's the person who's using this product is one of those cases where I think you inherently have the advantage of being D2C, in that you'll learn something there that no legacy retailer gets to learn, which really puts you at a significant advantage when you think about what a legacy retailer thinks about their demographics and their segments of their customers. A legacy retailer is thinking like, oh, our customer is 45 to 54, our customer is female, our customer makes over $100,000 a year. Like, okay, that's fine. But an actual data point that tells you like, my customers should be receiving this kind of information in their inbox, not this totally irrelevant opposite information, is just vastly superior insight that you do not get from sitting on a Target shelf or something to that effect. No offense to Target.
Right, and a lot of brands that we work with, they've learned entirely new things about who is actually shopping from them, and so their preconceived notions and no matter how much sort of market research they do, just because you think 45 to 54-year-old women are purchasing from you doesn't mean that 25 to 34 aren't. purchasing from you, perhaps even more so, and for an entirely different use case than you even ever thought of. But you would not get that information if you don't have the proper questions set up, targeting the proper customers. And it can help inform new product development. It can help inform what sort of target demographics you're going after on your acquisition channels. It can inform creative around certain use cases that customers have of products that you never even think of. I mean, there's a lot of, I'd say, very like hard and specific ways that you can leverage fairing in Klaviyo in terms of very simple like pick list questions of do you have this or this, and then put you into a segment. But where I think it gets really cool is like all the aforementioned stuff where it's a little bit more soft and not necessarily as like set in stone with these hard data points, where, hey, what sort of cool use cases are customers using this for? What are some ways that we can maybe get creative with our product development, stuff like that?
Yeah, 100%. And that's actually one of the questions we have here from our customers is, I'm guessing you would argue your most effective or favorite integration is Klaviyo, but their question, most effective integration you'd use with fairing and why? Maybe we'll challenge you to say something that's not Klaviyo and pick a different one.
Oh boy. Well, I mean, Klaviyo for sure, just to touch on that, because that's where you're going to be able to move the needle on your retention and LTV metrics the most. And the way you do that is by ingesting all this data from fairing and leveraging it to be more personalized and intentional with what you're sending customers. But if I had to pick a second favorite, I mean, Google Analytics, I wouldn't even say is necessarily a favorite, because while it's super powerful, it's just like, that's the core use case. And so I don't want to sort of cop out with that either. I think Shopify Flow, because Shopify Flow has some pretty interesting capabilities with it. I mean, one of the things that we did to do some surprise and delight is customer checks out, they answer a question. I'll just keep using the skincare example. They answer the question, oh, they have dry skin. So then in Shopify Flow, what we can do is, oh, customer answered this question, dry skin, tag them as a dry skin customer, and now include a free sample of a certain product in that order that's going to be going out to them. That's sort of like a surprise and delight. Hey, we knew you have dry skin, thought you wanted to check this out as well. It's a different product from our dry skin collection. That's, I think, is a really cool use case. And as I mentioned before, that first order experience is so important because you really need that percentage that come back for order number 2 to be as high as possible. So trying to throw little bits and pieces in there like that is really, really valuable and can help move the needle.
Love it. So Vince is very active in the chat. Vince, we owe you a little gift for your participation here. And Vince's question, I will address first because it's somewhat fairing related, and then I'll pass off to you, Brandon, to see if you happen to have anything to say. So Vince's question is, how many surveys does it take to be statistically significant to start sending emails or SMS? And I would argue in a lot of the cases that Brandon's talking about here, when you're talking about personalization, just to be clear, and maybe this is all table stakes and we all understand this, but just to be clear, the value of personalization, of course, is that hypothetically it's one-to-one. If you ask anyone in the old days of ad tech, like myself, one-to-one marketing was always basically like fictional, and you would pretend that was a thing that you could do. But this is literally one-to-one marketing, right? Like you find out this data point on your customer, you then can send them something that is, even if it's a one-to-many relationship, the fact of the matter is the content is specified to that data point in and of itself. So hypothetically, you could have a list of one. Now, I assume what Vince wants to know, maybe from Brandon's standpoint as an experienced agency rep, is how many responses makes a worthwhile list to start putting resources towards, maybe what I would guess is the question. And Vince, feel free to clarify.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons why I like to ask the other question, so that you can get data points in the Klaviyo that are like specific. So let's say dry skin, for example. I think the only way to do one-to-one in Klaviyo is to have the content itself sort of dynamically pulled in. And so you can only do that with certain types of questions that you ask in fairing. If you do open-end response questions in fairing, those can't be like pulled in and used to personalize an email at scale. And the reason why I say that is because I'll just use the Black Friday Cyber Monday email example again. You could put 3 or 4, maybe 5 custom properties in the campaign text itself that are going to dynamically change based off of your fairing data points. And so that's how you can be much more efficient with your time and still achieve some of this personalization at scale. Because the sort of the bandwidth that would be required to create 20 different emails manually, all based off of individual segments, and it just doesn't make it worthwhile. So that's one area we like to lean into in order to achieve that. In terms of size, I think it depends on where you're at as a brand, but if you're doing anything that couldn't be tested for like statistical significance, then you're sort of just leaning off of we're going on best practices here, which I would prefer to stay away from. And typically, most brands are just sort of getting at the tip of the iceberg here. So why don't we just even segment a campaign by like new versus returning customer, or based off of skin type? We're typically not having to. Most brands just get started there before they think about how do we go beyond even that.
Yeah, it can be a good exploratory tool. And to your point, Brandon, having other as a response when you're not sure exactly who your less than obvious segments might be is a good opportunity, because you will get your customers to tell you what they basically they're self-segmenting, right? So they're going to tell you some indicators. And to Brandon's point, it's while it's important to think of, or I should say, it is important to think of personalization. Any tool you're using where it allows for custom attributes or variables that can be dynamically placed based on some piece of text, some string, some data point, that responses to survey questions are structured as long as they fall within the realm of some classification system that you've put together. So if you have 4 responses, that's a classification system. Once you get into the other, that's where you get a lot of exploratory gold, which is really great, but it does obviously take you out of that structured data realm. So it's important to balance the two. I mean, certainly anyone who's been with us for a while, who uses us for attribution, would say like they found out about TikTok through the other responses before they put it into their list of responses for attribution. So that's a good indicator of the value of other. But Brandon's point is, I think, should be taken under strong advisement there as far as the efficacy of bucketing your customers. So yeah. Let's see what else we've got here. All right. Someone's asking for your secret sauce here, Brandon. What's an under the radar channel you like to put brands onto?
An under the radar channel?
Yeah.
I would say, well, you'd be shocked at how many brands still don't do SMS marketing, which is always surprising to me. But beyond that, I would say direct mail, especially given the integrations that are now out with direct mail platforms and Klaviyo. And so the way we look at Klaviyo is like one central hub of all customer data that informs both email, text, push, and direct mail notifications. And direct mail is really valuable, especially in like customer win-back flows, and the ability to set those automatically and have them fire based off of customer actions is really, really impactful. So I think direct mail would be what I would go with, though obviously I'm looking at it more from a customer retention and experience standpoint than maybe an acquisition.
Yeah.
Though you could also leverage direct mail for acquisition too.
Yeah. I appreciate it. Okay. You were challenged and you did not fail to deliver. That actually segues into the other question here. This is another one asking for free advice of an agency, basically. It's well written. I'll just read it verbatim then. Given the market, what's something agencies are doing on the retention side to expand their value? Probably written by another
So
agency.
no, I'm what's something that retention agencies are doing to expand their value? I mean, I think
What it,
being a retention agent, go ahead.
sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think just being a retention agency in and of itself is where the value is, especially right now because of all the issues that are happening. And your tried and true customers are where you're going to be able to extract the most value, and then the potential to turn them really into brand advocates and start to roll out some robust referral programs. I mean, we have clients doing upwards of 10% of store revenue through the referral programs that we've implemented for them. And the reason why we're a retention agency versus just an email and SMS agency is because it's so important to have an understanding of the broader customer journey and where you can be pulling out data points, how you can be leveraging all these different solutions in your Klaviyo flows. Because if you don't have that understanding of the Shopify tech stack ecosystem, or you don't think about things from a personalization standpoint, and you just sort of log into Klaviyo and that's where you operate and work within a vacuum, your retention results are going to be significantly hampered. And so our entire team is a retention specialist first and foremost, making recommendations across the entire customer journey from the moment that they add that first product to cart all the way through their last order with your brand. Email and SMS just happens to be the biggest driver of retention, but we're making tech stack recommendations. We're making recommendations on, should you be building out a quiz? Should you be looking at a referral program? What are the questions that you should be asking with fairing, and how is that going to inform not only our personalization strategy, but like the transactional touch points that we build out via Malomo and Klaviyo's integration. So there's sort of on and on there. And I think the second thing is, going into potentially a recession, the value in working with an agency like us is because of the fact that we're so deeply integrated with each of the best in class solutions for use case like reviews, use case post-purchase surveys, use case email and SMS. So when you work with us, we have a framework that is plug and play to an extent, because we know these are the 30 times we've onboarded a brand to Malomo as an example. These are all the things that work. This is how we do it. We get you up and running significantly faster than you would be able to if you wanted to do it yourself, and actually probably for cheaper because of how quick we are to market with it. And so I think hopefully that answers the question. But I think those are the two things for what agencies can do right now.
Yeah. Answered and threw in a little pitch for yourself, which is what everyone should do. Information. Absolutely. Well, the last question I have here is actually an absolute layup. So the question is, what is drinks?
What is drinks? Okay. Well, I will give the short answer here because I know we only have 16 minutes left. Drinks is a sort of a beverage technology company. They have different facets of the business. They started back in 2013 originally as just a direct-to-consumer brand called Wine Insiders. Ship about, I believe, like 7 million bottles around the U.S. each year. And so with that size and scale, given the extremely complex alcohol rules and regulations in the U.S. based off of prohibition all the way back in the 20s, there's literally down to each zip code in the United States has different rules and regulations when it comes to direct shipping alcohol to them. And so they had to create their own compliance and tax solution to be able to power their e-commerce brand. Sort of part two was in 2018. They took that software to be able to turn any online store into a ship to home wine program. So companies like Martha Stewart, Macy's, Thrive Market, Instacart, Kroger, they all leverage their solution to be able to do that. And then part three is this relationship with Shopify now. And the reason why they acquired Electriq is because they developed in partnership with Shopify the go-to-market around Shopify for wine and fast follows of both beer and liquor and malt and other beverage categories. But for the first time ever now on Shopify, you can sell direct to consumer right now, just wineries and retailers, but with all the proper tax and compliance in place And so we're actually the only solution outside of Avalara that's embedded into Shopify's checkout like that with the tax API and all the compliance customizations that we had to make there. But like one example would be in Michigan, you're not allowed to ship a consumer over a certain milliliter amount on it's either monthly or quarterly basis. And so how is a winery supposed to track that, and especially in real time on a consumer, unless there's a RegTech solution built into your e-commerce platform to be able to handle that for you, where you don't have a complete headache trying to stay in compliance with the rules of the state of Michigan. So that's just one example of why a solution like this was necessary.
Yeah, I think any of us avid drinkers who have navigated around the country know that's yeah, that is a problem I do not want to solve. So I'm glad someone else is trying.
Yeah, it's all about consumer choice. So
yeah. All right. Well, that does it for Q&A. Brandon, again, thank you on behalf of Fairing. Thank you so much for taking the time here to show everyone all your best practices on Fairing use. And where can folks find you?
Yeah, so reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have any questions, or you can reach out to Electriq marketing.com. Got a live chat. I get all of them. I'll respond to them. It's just Electriq with a Q at the end instead of a C, and then marketing.com. And when we share out the webinar too, I'll include my email there if you prefer that, but it's just Brandon at electriqmarketing.com.
Beautiful. All right. With that, we're going to give people 13 minutes of their life back. Take a break, have a little snack, have a little, power nap before you get back to whatever it is you're doing with your day. And thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the week and weekend. Take care.